welcome back to the Discovery Doc podcast. I'm here with your host,
Dr. Cece, functional medicine nurse practitioner, crunchy mama of 3, and self-proclaimed toxin tamer. And this chick over here.
I'm Anna Kate, your medical mystery overachiever and discovery liaison. And I'm also your antibody accumulator now. We'll get into that in a future episode. And we are joined back again by this wonderful human being sitting in front of us. So if you're seeing this absolutely smiling face on the screen next to us, or tell us who she is again. If you missed last one, go listen to last episode.
We have Dr. Arlene Dijamco. She is someone that I just respect you so much. It is amazing what you do, but she is an integrative physician, someone who embodies just spirituality, emotional, physical well-being, also a mama of 4 herself and has her own medical practice, just doing a unicorn. Let's say that, just doing all the things. In our first episode, we talked a lot about what cranial osteopathy is, which is her bread and butter. So if you did miss that, make sure you go back and listen before you listen to this one, or you might be a little confused. And now we would like to just dive a little bit deeper into it. And where I would like to start is with all of the, what do you call them? Snot goblins.
Snot goblins.
Yes, rolling around. I have coined this term fluvid, COVID and flu season. How can we use cranial osteopathy as a modality to prevent and or treat patients who are dealing with snotball kiddos?
Well, I have plenty of families coming to see me. Actually, right before they go to school, they kind of want to just check in. They don't really have any problems. They just want to check in, make the year smoother. Or as school gets into session, then you have all the different stress and anxieties and worry about what's coming up. So when they come in, it's sometimes say they don't necessarily have any concerns, but they just want to check in.
Mm-hmm.
And I love seeing people like that too, because it's just okay. And I'm totally fine. Any age, if they want to talk, if they don't want to talk, it's okay, because I can listen to their bodies and their bodies will tell me the story of whatever is going on. Yeah. So sometimes, depending on the personalities and the constitutions, you can get the kids where everything looks good on the outside. And then on the inside, you can feel the tension. And usually the parents will know something. The mom will know, they seem a little off, but they seem to be doing okay. So I'm not really sure. But you'll be able to feel that tension inside the body in terms of how the autonomic nervous system is working. So you have your sympathetic arm, which is that fight or flight response, your parasympathetic arm, that rest and digest, or it could be in a frozen state. So if there's any imbalance there in just the autonomic nervous system, then that can make a lot of physiology go awry, or just make you a bit more vulnerable to illness, or it could make you just feel more stress, and then your adrenals get tapped out and give you some digestive issues with those nervous butterflies, make you a little bit more over-responsive or over-reactive to things. So things seem like a big deal, but even if you think about what I'm saying there, you can translate that into allergies or sensitivities. Things are a big deal. Small things are now a big deal. So you're on this defense mode. And then you can also see that in terms of school, how they're able to pay attention, or how they're getting along with their classmates and their teacher. So many things. So what looks like ADHD could just be the autonomic nervous system out of balance. Or we were talking about earlier, if some parents say oh, my kid has always been high strung ever since they were born. To me, that signals oh, there was probably something, either a birth issue or before pregnancy. I mean, birth is a really stressful process. Yes. You have this ginormous being squeezed out a very relatively small hole.
I say this all the time.
Yes. You don't know it until you've been through it, exactly what that means.
And to think that's stressful for the baby as well.
Yes, and you are one unit. So 0 to age 7, it's this of course, when you're pregnant, you are one unit. But when you're a baby, when you're nursing that baby, you're still really one unit. And then I say 0 to age 7, that child is slowly growing in their independence
Mm.
and starting to understand like who they are. And that will continue and continue even as they get older. But that 0 to 7 age is such a close knit unit between like, especially the mom and the child. And so what you feel, your baby feels, and what the baby feels, you feel. And you don't have to try to break it down like, well, who felt it first? You both feel it at the same time. It's nobody's fault. It's just life of your experience of what you're going through. But that can make an impression on the nervous system and how the physiology is working. And so if there's any stress that gets stuck, I call it a stuck button, because our nature is resilience and balance. So if things get stuck, I'm like, oh, it's just a stuck button. We just
Yeah.
need to unstick the button. And so things can flow again. And so that can make all the difference too. So some kids that maybe appeared to be overly anxious kids or very sensitive kids or hyperactive kids end up not being so much, because uh, most constitutions, I feel like most people's essences are actually really, really forgiving and really tolerant and patient. So it doesn't mean that you can't have like some sort of like sassiness to your constitution, but a natural essence, that natural state of who you are when you feel completely free and like yourself, is a feel good, natural state of being. Like you feel good, you feel happy. You're not actually meant to be, you're not just that kind of person that just overreacts to things. That to me is a nervous system imbalance or some sort of like stress pattern that got stuck.
Mm.
And so there's ways to smooth that out. So the cranial osteopathy is one way to help. There's other ways through breath work, through yoga, through just healthy lifestyle. But if you need help, then the cranial osteopathy is like one way that I've just found can be immensely helpful, and to be able to address so many different dimensions and layers all at once.
Wow. Can you explain what you as the practitioner physically feel when you are
Yeah.
working on these patients?
Yes.
Yes, I'm so curious.
I teach physicians how to do this from the introductory, from the basics onto like more advanced levels of just like feeling the emotional body. So, and I actually teach the parents and how to do this, and also the kids too, because a lot of people that come to see me are very sensitive in terms of like more empathic. They can feel, they pick up on emotions easily. They feel things in their body easily. So, what looks intangible is actually feels very tangible to me. So if you were to take a balloon and to squeeze one part of it, you can feel that on the other side. So it's not just where my hands are. I'm also feeling the space between my hands. And you get that idea when you hold a balloon. But also if you had the ropes of a sail. So you don't ever have to just imagine a simple sail with 2 ropes. You never have to touch it. And you know which way the wind is blowing. And you can actually kind of maneuver the sail or change it, but you never touch it.
Yeah.
So that's like part of like how I'm feeling things. It's like when you imagine everything's connected, then you can feel that connection through things from farther away, just like the sail.
Mm.
So we can talk about it in terms of physics by feeling those vectors of force and like following those layers. So you could like if we talked about the fascial layers, it feels a little bit more like rubber bandy, like not as dense as bone. So bone, we usually start with bone. So that's probably why it's called cranial osteopathy. Osteo means bone. So if you feel bone, even if you were to feel yourself, it feels more dense.
Right.
If you were to feel fascia, the layers that hold everything together, or dura, it has more give to it. And then if you were to like be really light and feel the fluid or your pulse, it's a much lighter feel to it.
Mm.
So I tell people when we're teaching, I'm like, well, bone feels like bone, membrane feels like membrane, fluid feels like fluid. It's kind of exactly how you thought it might
Yeah,
feel.
yeah.
And then we get into the subtleties of it because there's like that physical,
Mhm.
easy, tangible feel. And then you can start to feel the rhythms. And that's when you have to like really soften and be
Mm,
really still in yourself. Because if you're distracted by your own inner workings and your own physiology, it's harder. It's like noise. And so harder it'll feel like work. It feels like you have to try to feel through things. But
yeah.
if you're very quiet, so I'll usually be in a kind of meditative state during treatment. So I basically meditate all day long. And then you can start to feel like it's like everything's singing to you or crying, or
Mhm.
anything else. So then you can feel the bone and it has a quality to it. So you feel the tangible, but then you can also feel the that rhythm that's like I call it singing, especially if it's like more in resonance, like everything will feel like it's like singing. So, um, I mean, I guess it's like if you couldn't hear, if you were deaf and you had to feel music through vibrations, which they do that,
Yeah.
for people so they can feel it, or you were to put your hand on an instrument and then you could feel the music that way.
Mm.
That's what it feels like
So
to
when
me.
you don't feel that music, then you are moved very intuitively to physically move your hands to then help that person with the interconnectedness and to help that symphony regain its connectedness, I
It's
guess.
not
Yeah, so my approach actually might be slightly different than other cranial osteopaths, but if there's some dissonance, so, ooh, like things don't sound like or feel like they're in tune, then, see, the essence of a person is always healthy.
Mm,
It's like they're pure light, pure love. It's always there. So their health is always there. It's just a matter of uncovering it.
mm,
So if you show that dissonance to the essence, it sort of takes care of it. It's like,
mm,
hey, oh, I see you.
I remember.
Oh, I didn't know. It's okay. And now the essence of the person has like seen and heard them. And when you are not afraid of being afraid, see, it sort of like doesn't have the hold anymore.
mm.
Like if you're not afraid of seeing yourself, it doesn't have that kind of hold. If you're not worried, it's like that meta. If you don't have the worry of being worried, then that emotion doesn't have as much hold on you anymore. So the same thing, even like physically or in the rhythms, or if there's any dissonance, if you are not afraid of seeing it, hearing it, letting it be, it no longer has a hold on you. So there is no longer a dissonance. That means you're okay with how you feel. That creates a resonance. And then nature can take over and do what it usually does, which is
Wow.
flow.
Beautiful.
So
Wow.
then it can become unstuck from a stuck to flow.
I
Right.
have
So
a
you help it. Yeah.
I have a question. Well, can I'm asking for you to give us homework live on our episode today.
Yeah.
Will you walk us through a resonant breath work homework? And we can do this at the end. We don't have to do it now. So we can get into that space where at the end we can do breath work and then the rest of y'all can go on the rest of your day. But because we still have some questions and things that we want to talk about. But will you do that
Sure.
for us at the end?
Sure.
That'd
Yeah.
be great.
That was so insanely powerful.
So
That
insightful as well of
yes.
understanding how you feel what you feel and what that means to a
The patient that
layman
you're working
brain
on.
of
Mhm.
how do you do what you do and why it's so important
Yeah.
for everything.
Do you find then how often do you find that patients will have a big emotional release after you work on them?
Um, so big is all relative because it's sort of like, what does it mean to them? Because they're the ones to kind of qualify it. But I would say for adults, a at least 50% of patients have some sort of like tearing up in
Mm,
the first visit. Because
mm.
the first visit tends to be a bigger one because there's just like a life, years
Yeah.
of stuff to kind of go through. And so, but the bigness of it, so because I don't want people to feel like, oh no, I'm going to go in there and then just start bawling. Although, it could, I have big grown men who feel safe to cry their eyes
Oh,
out. And I think that is so beautiful. You would never know it. They are such professionals in their lives, in their business, whatever they do. So, but that kind of vulnerability is a hidden strength. So if you have the courage to be able to see yourself fully like that, that to me is so much strength.
Mm,
So I don't see it as a sign of weakness. And tears are release.
mm,
Sighing is a release. Laughing is a release. Shaking, so trembling is a release. So those are all natural ways that your body and your being are trying to restore balance.
mhm.
And 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 we may or may not welcome it. So if it's overwhelming, then we might want to contain it. But see, that's sort of puts a cork on it, so it sort of like buries it back down.
Right.
And it's not a judgment of like because it may also not be healthy just to unleash the floodgates all at once. That's not the point either.
Yeah.
It's imagining that baby. So when you're talking about these really deep emotional and vulnerable points, you imagine that baby again. And you're not going to make the baby do it at any other pace than the pace that the baby wants. But at whatever pace feels good to that baby. That means that basically whatever they're going through at the moment, they are okay and to be somehow okay with it.
Yeah. Wow. Then the kind of the other side that I would like to talk about a little bit is we for my own patient population, I see a lot of patients who suffer chronically with symptoms, and this might look like IBS, IBD, Crohn's. It might look like chronic fatigue, joint pain. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But in a general sense, how important is it for those patients who may be suffering from chronic symptoms to receive such a modality as craniosteopathy to aid in their healing journey? What benefit can it bring to them to bring on board that modality?
It can be really powerful just because we're addressing again so many different dimensions and layers. Um, I'm not saying it's the only thing ever. However, there's not that many modalities I can think of, or not. It all actually depends on the practitioner because it's what I bring to cranial osteopathy is more than just the regular what people think of even as osteopathy, because sometimes they can think of it more mechanically. So approaching it like with the whole being is really important. And I would say that any time that you can approach someone as a whole being, it's going to be beneficial. And with the way that I practice, I've just been able to integrate it and incorporate it into the cranial osteopathy so that I can address more layers all at once. And so that's the piece where it's like I don't know that many practitioners that can address multiple layers like that simultaneously.
I
Um,
completely agree. Just to say one thing quick to justify or solidify what you're saying is that I have a lot of chiropractors who say, "Oh, I also do," and they will call it craniosacral therapy, um, not cranial osteopathy, and it is so different. And it's not to say what they're doing is
Less.
any lesser than, but it is
mhm,
it's a good point to differentiate that there are people who perform that modality and it's strictly physical. And
mhm.
that is why when I specifically refer patients to you, it's because I know that you are viewing that patient so much more holistically and mind, body, spirit all is one. And it's not just a physical feeling that you have.
Yeah,
So much
it's
deeper.
hard to explain because it's like I know that usually most people, especially in the integrative holistic world, this is our ideal to do, mind, body, spirit. It's one thing to talk about it; it's another thing to actually feel it.
Yes.
So I think that's where the difference would be. And if you couldn't find a practitioner, somebody that could address it in those ways, then what I suggest to people is like, well, see different kinds of people so that you can address the different aspects that are needed for your healing. And at times, again, some layers will call out more than others. And I have huge respect for my colleagues that do have more mechanical approach. I mean, for surgeons who can set a bone, And so, but so we all need to work together.
Yes.
So if the surgeon sets the bone, but I can help them with like the ongoing healing. Because once it's set, casted, they're like, all right, you know, you're good, they're healed. But then it's like, oh, but it still feels weak. Or a year later, they're like, oh no, it's still not quite right.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, get the flow going. Don't forget to
Thank
address the
you.
emotional body that's still shocked from the accident and was intended to fully. They tended to the crisis, the physical crisis, saved a life. But then there's so many other aspects to healing. And some of these, when once I start to say them out loud, you may think like, oh, well, yeah, that's obvious, but that's good because I like to call out like just that big elephant in the room.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, yes, address the obvious things first.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not?
And that makes Dr. Arlene a great person to have on your dream team. So as you're walking through things and getting that overall view and having that functional and holistic approach to your health, discover that's a good someone to have on your dream team that can help
Yeah.
keep things moving and release and work through all of the things that everybody else is helping you work through as well. And now
Yeah.
a word from our sponsor.
With a looming fluid season upon us, prevention is key. Supporting your immune and gut health every day is crucial. That's why I trust Stellar Biotics for daily immune and gut health support. With 20 years of science behind their metabiotic and probiotics, Stellar Biotics produces all natural supplements that are proven safe and effective for everyone in your family: children, nursing mothers, and even pets. I trust them for my family's immune and gut health support, and I hope you consider them for yours. Learn more at stellarbiotics.com and use coupon code DrCC10 to get 10% off your purchase today. Yeah. A question I have, very, excuse me, random question that I was thinking of earlier was pregnant women. Do you, because sometimes we can, how do you feel? Sometimes we can have that emotional release, and sometimes it can be a release of past trauma or whatever it might bring up physically. How do you feel about that in pregnancy? Do you feel that helps mama be set up for an even more successful pregnancy and birth? What are your thoughts?
Ideally, even before they're pregnant. I would say that most pregnant women that come to see me have probably already seen me before, and so that's why they're comfortable coming to see me, while they're pregnant. But if you just imagine that womb as this beautiful nest, so what does the baby need to grow? Nourishment. How is it going to get that nourishment? Through flow. So again, the health is in the flow. It
Mm,
needs the blood flow. It needs the drainage. So if when things are really tight, I mean, then all it's trying to go through a rock to get to the nest for the baby. So it's
yeah.
like it's a little harder. So with people that are dealing with fertility issues, that tends to be the way things feel. It's like, oh, instead of the soft nest where things can flow so easily, because pregnant women have more fluid, and so
Right.
they feel even more fluid. So all those different layers from the bone, the fascia, feel even more fluid than they usually are. So if you just soften the rock feel and restore the flow, then that's of
Mm,
course, it's like common sense again. Of course, it will nourish the baby. And I also tell pregnant women, if you feel tight, the baby
mm,
feels tight.
yes.
It's physics.
Yes.
Why do you think you feel tight? Because the baby's pushing and it's run out of room. What's the baby going to feel? The opposite of that, like, confined. I need more room.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's just something else to consider because you can like loosen up tissue to give the feel of more room and more relaxation in the body. Because obviously, if the muscles and the fascia are tight like this, um, if you run out of room once they've been stretched, then baby's gonna feel that too.
Right. And then once baby is here, do you see a lot of ties? Do you see a lot of torticollis or maybe head shape abnormalities where we can help avoid helmets or anything like that? Or, what are your newborns coming
Yeah, I
to that you
I
see?
have, well, if the families know me or they've heard of me, they'll just bring them in just to check in,
Yeah.
and then otherwise, I'll have the lactation consultants or, ENT maybe less ENT because they don't know as much. But I work with the integrative dentists and all the centers, the tongue tie and short, torticollis. And I would love to educate the other pediatricians to know that why watch and wait for a torticollis? What are you waiting for?
Thank you.
Like, just help it. Just, I mean, now they're going to have to develop and go through all their milestones
Yeah,
slightly off
yeah.
kilter. You want them to be able to develop from a nice baseline of neutral centered balance, because otherwise everything will be askew. And then the sooner you address it, the easier it is before things start to like cement in. And it's not that you can't address it, but I'll even feel adults that are like, oh, I had a torticollis when I was little, and I'm like, well, it's
You
part
still
of it's
there.
remnants of it are still there.
Wow. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not saying anything that's meant to be like to hurt anyone's feelings. I mean, when I was in second grade, I fell on this tooth, cracked this tooth, and then so it was on the right side. And so my first cranial osteopathy course, they were working on the face. This was on the fifth day, and another student was working on it. And I was like, I can feel something moving. I was like, in my face. I was like,
Mm.
how can you possibly move the bones in my face? I'm like, I could feel it. And then the table trainer, the physician working with us said, yes. And now your plane of vision is more level. And I was like, what? So I ran out of the room and I looked in the mirror and I was like, oh my gosh. It's nothing that most people notice. My sisters noticed, but like my coworkers didn't. So it wasn't like
But you
so
did.
grotesque of a difference,
Yeah.
But I used to watch lecture like with my head
Mhm.
slightly tilted like this because this eye was a little higher. And so I tilted my head. I thought it was just a habit. That's just how I sat.
Mhm.
And it was making my plane of vision level. So, once things, like, softened up and I knew exactly what it was from, I was like, "Oh, it's when I fell in 2nd grade. I fell
Mm.
from the parallel bars, I locked my arms and flipped over." And then, yeah, so over the years, it's gotten, like, more and more level, but that was my first experience in cranial osteopathy, and I was said, "No plastic surgeon could have done that," you know?
Yeah.
Crazy. And what
Crazy. Yeah,
yeah.
I was flipping out. I was
Yeah.
like, I was it was in me. So, it's like one thing when it happens in
Things are
someone else. When
moving.
it happens in you, I was, like, running around telling everyone, like, oh my gosh, my face moved, my face moved. How can you move your face?" And they're looking at me because it's not like they looked at me in that much detail or measured the alignment of my
Right.
eyes, so they didn't but my sisters noticed because 'cause they're like, "Your smile's different."
Wow.
'Cause my smell was more asymmetric and it got more symmetric.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that one introductory course alone, I was, like, telling everyone. But then I realized people don't have a frame of reference to understand this. So it sounds like gibberish or it sounds like too outside of a reality of what could be. But,
Yeah.
um, I mean, it just takes the experience of your own experience, and that usually, shifts everything. Even when I teach the students or, people come see me, um, I'll just say, I'm like, "Well, just try it out, like, gather your data points." That's what I often say when teaching students. I mean, just gather your data points,
Mhm.
see what works for you. So, maybe try it that way and then try it another way. And then over time, your mind will start to get on board of what works.
Mm.
So I might teach them a more way that works with a person's rhythms. So that requires listening to the person, listening to their body, listening to their essence. And then they might have learned like a more mechanical way. For example, lymph pumping. We did a lymph pumping class before for students. And he's like, well, I said, if you do it this way that I'm teaching you, it will be far more efficient and you'll get much more depth in your treatment. And so one of the students said, well, how do you know that?
Mm.
Where are the articles for that are showing the cranial rhythm impulse has been changed? And I said, I was like, well, you are like an ocean. So you have an ocean of rhythms. It would be very difficult to do a study on every single one of those rhythms. And you're also like your own unique like body of rhythms. I
Mhm.
was like, so since everyone's different, everyone practices differently, I would suggest like just try it out. You do it the way knew before, and then you do it another way. So he had somebody practice on him, and so he could feel it and he came back around, he was like, "The way that you showed us," he's like, it was so much better. He's
Yeah.
like, "I could feel things moving, I could feel things flowing." He's like, "The other way we did it, that they knew how to do it before," he's like, "I didn't like it.
Mm,
It felt aggressive, and it felt, like, pushy." And
mm,
I was like, "That's the difference
yeah,
with working with someone's rhythms, is that you get into the ease, so now you can, like, start to, like, surf with them versus, like, pushing against each
right.
other."
Do you
I
find
mean, even with a torticollis, you push a torticollis, it's gonna pull right
oh,
back.
push
Yeah.
right back at you, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find because you are correct me if I'm wrong, but you naturally seem like a very intuitive person. That wasn't something and again, correct me, but I feel that you were born kind of with that natural intuition and you've kind of fostered that over the years to apply it to your practice, which is amazing. And I connect on that because with all of my education and background and everything like that, when I'm sitting in front of a patient and it's very different, my hands are not on them like yours are physically feeling, but I still have very strong feelings of in a world of so many options, I know exactly what I need to do for this patient to fulfill my role in their health journey. And
Mm.
that part is irreplaceable. So do you find sometimes that it's hard teaching other people what you do who may not connect on such a deep level as you do? Or do you find that people who end up wanting to learn about cranial osteopathy do to some degree have that intuition?
So, when I teach people, I spend more time helping them set up a foundation, which means they have to get quiet. But it is worthwhile time for me to do that because it makes everything else a lot easier.
Mhm.
So, if we don't do that, then they feel like they're trying and it's hard to feel what might feel subtle in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, to me, these things are not don't feel subtle anymore, but in the beginning, they feel very subtle. So but if you just help people ground and center in the beginning, you can teach them to feel so many things. And I've done this, like, over and over again, and sometimes it's just it can be that lack of confidence in the beginning, but see, the lack of confidence will be like a trying, so it's just like, be okay not knowing anything
Mhm.
so that you can approach from the beginner's mind, and it's just like this clean space where you don't know what to expect. Or sometimes, like in the class I just taught teaching the emotional body, um, sometimes it's like, what if you feel something and it feels confusing? I was like, "Oh,
Mm,
well, that might be information, because chances are it is confusing and the emotions that the person's feeling are confusing to them.
mm,
So maybe what you're feeling is their confusion." And so, but it's learning to like tease that apart of like, what's my
right.
confusion versus like, what am I picking up on confusion? And this is great because this is like, I put together, I have a book coming out, hopefully the end of this year. And it's, I am exactly what you're asking about because it's like, I am intuitive, embrace your inner light. So it's how to ground yourself, how to ground the body, how to ground your mind, how to ground your spirit, and then how to use your body as a compass, how to use your mind as a compass, and how to use your spirit as a compass.
Mm,
So this is written for regular people, but I'll also be teaching to, and we'll also be teaching like other kinds of practitioners how to develop this sense, because part of it is something that I've had, but also part of it has been cultivated and developed.
sure did.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of like understanding yourself, because everybody has these intuitive gifts, and it's a matter of understanding them. So like people that are really good at business and finances, super intuitive with money,
Mm,
but they may not be so in other areas of their lives like relationships. But if you can see where you have it and then can just expand it and develop it in the other dimensions of your life, then yeah, you can have more access to that
right.
just more readily available. And so, so that's what I'll teach my patients too, and that's what we'll teach in the workshops and classes. And sure, I can teach other kinds of practitioners that don't have their hands on how to feel things more from the biofield.
Mm,
So that's something that we're going to develop in the future, because the more you can understand, the more helpful it is. I mean, just to expand what is already possible, and like
Yeah.
we are down here with like medicine when we could be like
Yes.
limitless.
Yes.
So to be able to like help both the patients, but also all different kinds of practitioners understand that and how they can access it, you have to access it for yourself first. So that's what I teach. The way I teach is I don't want someone to practice on another person until they've felt it in themselves.
Yes.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Absolutely. I have another question filled with questions is, and this is something that I had to work on. I am 100% an empath and I feed off of other people's emotions, and I had to really work on separating, not separating, but creating boundaries and protecting that side of me, especially when I started to practice. Because when I deal with a lot of patients who have struggled with chronic illness for so long, I would absorb all of their emotions, and
Mhm.
it can be physically draining. And that is still not something that I perfected, but I've gotten it much farther than where I used to be. But with you, you are, and for me, that's me sitting across the table, just listening to them and kind of absorbing what they're feeling. But you are so physically connected to that person in this moment. Did you, especially when you first started practicing, find yourself being overwhelmed with what you were feeling and what you were absorbing? And then how did you move forward and kind of create boundaries or protect yourself from that?
You know, it's an interesting question because I feel like a part of me wasn't as afraid of those kinds of things, and, um, and a part of me I mean, I would just think of, like, my own life and then just with my dad passing a couple years ago and just going through intense emotions like that, um, I had to talk myself, like, coach myself through being present because I was like, "I don't want to miss this very important time in my life," and then and my dad's crossing over, and so, but that does take a lot of courage, and so it takes some practice and cultivation over the years of not being afraid to feel.
Mhm.
So again, if you're not afraid of feeling, and if you're not afraid of being afraid, you become untouchable.
Mm,
So all that stuff just goes through you, and if you know exactly who you are, your essence and your light, no darkness can enter.
so what you're saying is I have some work to do.
It's not a goal. It's not a goal. It's like a moment to moment thing.
Yeah.
So, if there's times where I start to feel like if I'm getting run down, then I'll kind of take a look at that and see what's going on. So, yeah, it's something that everyone goes through and in various ways. And I used to feel that like when I was first starting in practice, I would open the door and I would call it a dark hole, like a black hole, you
Right.
know? So you open it, and then because then I would feel all the energy go sorry, and so and it would sorta, like, kinda take me, aback a little bit, and I'd be like, "Ooh," you know? But I would know right away, I'm like, usually that person was feeling really down and depressed, and so, um understanding, like, helps a lot because it's like, if you can understand that, like, "Oh, they're going through something," then it helps you to have some compassion. But
Yes.
also, if I'm not afraid of what I'm feeling, because in the beginning, I could feel scared, and I'm like, "Ooh, that scared me." But if it's just like what we are talking about before, what the kids say, it's just like, "Oh, yeah,
You
I
flowed
got
through
scared."
it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes, like, I early on when it was, like, really early in practice, then one of my patients, this mom, she was, like, tearing up because her daughter was having allergic reaction from something she had touched, even just, like, in the waiting room, and then I could feel because I feel very empathically too, and so my eyes started welling up with tears because she was so upset and sad about it, and, I don't remember, like, consciously trying to do anything about it. I remember it happening, but the mom was so touched because she was like, "You're the only one that's ever been like that, like, felt it, like, the way that I did," that I could feel that she was upset, and I was understanding about it, and so I guess however I behaved or however I responded to the situation was how I would have wanted someone to respond to me if I was in the situation because and I knew how to do that because I could feel her.
Right.
Right.
Um, so but I don't remember feeling afraid of that I was feeling sad too. I just felt like, "Oh, she's going through something," you know? That I
Empowered
just
by it
remember
almost to
yeah,
be a
but I
source.
could feel it in my body and I could feel my eyes, like, tear up, and it was noticeable to the mom as well. But you know what? I wouldn't say that I was always comfortable like that, because growing up, I hated feeling vulnerable,
Mm.
probably because I was so sensitive to things, but and I would say I remember in high school, I'd tell my friends, "I hate vulnerability." This is before Brené Brown and all of that, you know? But, I had to learn to be okay feeling vulnerable so that I could share myself too.
Mhm.
Um, and it did take me some courage in the beginning to share what I was noticing because in the beginning I was like, "Oh, they might think this is weird," or I was like, "I don't," maybe it might scare them.
Right.
Um, so but what I found is that the more comfortable I am with whatever I'm saying, then it creates like this nice safe nest that we can have a conversation about difficult things and still feel safe about it.
Right.
And and it's not like I don't say every single thing I notice. It would probably be exhausting. And I don't go into the world like trying to read everybody. I don't do that. I believe in just being really responsible about your abilities and what you can do. And so I don't do that unless I have permission. So if someone comes into my office, then that's a permission to,
Right.
what they're asking me to do. And so, and I always I stay in touch with stillness, that oneness, to say what's helpful
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
there's so much you can say, and
Yeah.
it wouldn't be helpful if someone just ran through things that they notice about you,
Right. No,
and
true. And it can be very overwhelming for patients, for on my end when I have 7 patients or 7 labs to go through and I like to be very thorough and go through everything so patients know their body on paper and what's going on. I always preface it by saying this is information. This is information
Mhm,
about your body that we can do something about. So
Mhm.
don't allow it to overwhelm you because now we know how to proceed forward. Now we know what we can do to help you. And, I think that's a similar sense in that I do pick and choose how I present that information and it's all necessary, but it's in a positive light because you are then doing something about it and you
Yeah.
can,
mhm,
reassure your own patients
yeah.
that yes, I'm feeling this, and this, but that's why you're here. That's wwhy I can help you.
Be the channel, not the reservoir. Channel,
And
not
I
the reservoir. Be the
I
channel.
tell my patients I tell my patients you because usually when they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I have so many problems," or I'm like, "Oh, it must be a lot." I'm like, "No, you only ever have one problem. It's like whether you feel in balance or not in balance."
Yeah.
And so if you don't feel in balance, things will reflect that. And especially when you have access to lots of specialty labs and different ways to look at things, you will be able to see ways that are out of balance.
Mm.
But it's still reflecting the one problem, just feeling out of balance.
Right.
That's it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. And that relates to anything that can relate
Everything.
to acute illness, chronic illness, healthy people. I mean, overall, in general, I think that's a main take home point
Mhm.
here. But before we wrap up, is there any burning information you want to give our community or any burning topic that we have not discussed or gone through that you'd like to share?
I mean, the main thing is that, like, everyone is this beautiful being of light and love, and the more you know that and realize that, see that, feel it, understand it, hear it, the more balanced you will feel,
Yes.
and
Love that.
that's all of health.
Yes. Wow. Well, on that
Very nice.
note, would you want to give some information to our community about how they can reach you if they're in the area, how they can come see you, how can they can learn more about cranial osteopathy and all the benefits that it may provide?
Absolutely. You can always sign up for my e-love letters. I send them out once a week on Wednesday. You can do that at allworldshealth.com. and I'll let you know about when the book is coming out. My editor's going through it, the book designer's going through it. It's really like a labor of love.
Oh, that's
It
amazing.
is so it's a baby. It's like a 2-year baby.
Incredible.
But it's so practical. So I take a lot of these things that feel maybe amorphous or intangible and make them more tangible and very easy exercises. And I think that's the one thing that people said about it. It's like it's so accessible and easy to understand. So taking like difficult topics and making them easier to understand. And I love talking about things that are the most important in our lives, but sometimes we shy away from. So that book is I Am Intuitive, Embrace Your Inner Light. And if you want to connect with me on any of the platforms, social media platforms, you can on Instagram at All Worlds Health, Facebook, All Worlds Health and Pediatrics, and on my YouTube channel, The Multidimensional MD, which you can find under my name too.
Beautiful. And we'll make sure that all of that is linked down into the show notes below. So you can just go and click on all this stuff. So you don't have to, you can go type it all in, but we'll have it available for click. So before we do our sign off, I would like to do a breathing exercise to reset
Oh, yes.
since today on that we are recording this, it is a Friday. So getting us ready for the weekend. And
Yes.
so when you listen to this, it will be a Thursday getting you ready for the weekend as well. So yeah, walk us through how we can do a reset whenever we feel like we need one.
So, one thing is like the long exhale, which is a very common exercise because it helps to boost the parasympathetics. If you think about the inhale, sympathetic, exhale as parasympathetic, then most people are needing more exhale. So,
Mm.
if all you did was an exhale that was at least twice as long as the inhale, then breathe in through the nose and either out through the mouth or out the nose. And you can take like 4 breaths like that. So, nice slow inhale and a long exhale. Again, inhale and a long exhale. And then inhale, long exhale. One more inhale. Long exhale. And if you could just bring your awareness, I mean, that's the simplest one, but if you bring your awareness all the way down your legs to the bottoms of your feet, most people have more energy up. So it's like bringing the energy down, literally grounding.
Mm.
And then one last thing I'll do is if you just remember that you are mostly space. So the cells of your body, the space that you occupy is mostly space. So if you start to breathe into that space between things, that space between your cells, the space between the individual atoms, even, there is where you will feel your essence. And then you can also remember that you have this huge biofield, this energy field around you. And so that is space that's part of your being. So you can expand your awareness to breathe into that space between things of even your energy body.
Mm. I have so many comments. 2 things I'll say quick before we go is immediately when you were mentioning how a lot of people have energy up here in the head, I was it was pressure and energy in my head, and when you then focus physically on bringing that down, immediately it went more towards my core.
Oh, that's so great.
Yes, and then the second part was the energy field. I went from this very tight in my shoulders to just naturally relaxing so much more to fill that space outward. And I've never thought about that. I meditate quite a bit. I've done breath work, and it's usually always internal.
Mhm.
And yes, breathing breath through the depths of your being, but I've never done it where you expand. And that was 2 seconds. And I felt
Yes,
so much
that's what
Thank
relaxation.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
that's what I'm saying. I was like,
Yeah.
it's like small things done consistently, and
Mhm.
then, and I know it's all vibration, and I know that when I'm talking about a certain thing, I can help bring people to that vibration so you can feel it
Mhm.
more easily. But once you're familiar with it, then you can go right there, visit at any time, and then to feel your being, because you are this infinite being in a finite package. And then you think about babies. So when baby's born, they're this infinite being in a really tiny package, and then being squeezed into an even smaller
Great cosmic
passageway.
Yeah.
living space.
So if it's a there's a reason why it's you know, we may feel off because our beings are so big, and sometimes our bodies don't feel like it can handle everything
Right.
that we are.
Well, thank you so much
This was
for all
beautiful.
of that. Yes, this is by far my favorite episode. Just all encompassing. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Dijamco. And any last anything?
Until next time.
Let's
Thanks.
cover together.
The content provided in this podcast provides general information and discussions on various topics related to health, wellness, and medical advancements. However, it is essential to understand that the content provided in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The hosts, guests, and contributors are individuals sharing their personal experiences, opinions, and knowledge in their respective fields. While they strive to provide accurate, up-to-date information, medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and the information presented in this podcast may not always reflect the most current research and medical guidelines. It is crucial to consult with a qualified healthcare professional or medical expert for specific medical concerns. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking medical treatment based on the information presented in this podcast. The Discovery Doc podcast encourages listeners to use their own judgment and discretion while implementing any suggestions, recommendations, or lifestyle changes discussed in this episode. Each individual's medical situation is unique and may work for one, may not be suitable or safe for another. The podcast hosts, guests, and contributors are not liable for any direct, indirect, consequential, or incidental damages or harm that may arise from listening or acting upon the information provided in this podcast. Listeners are responsible for their own health decisions and should exercise caution and seek professional guidance when necessary. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that you have read, understood, and agreed to this medical disclaimer. If you have any questions or concerns about this medical disclaimer, please consult a qualified healthcare professional.